Hello, this is Tony Abad. Welcome to this episode of the Digital Diplomat. Today, we're going to talk about an important topic that has been percolating, I think, in the world of digital media. And this has to do with misinformation. Information, as you know, should be as accurate and as truthful as possible. But in the digital world, who knows? And joining me today is Jani, who has over 15 years of experience in media, consumer technology, investment, and strategy. He's actually now one of the gatekeepers for investments and business in India. He'll tell us more about that. He's currently the Executive Vice President at Times Bridge of Times Internet. I'd like to ask Vero, could you tell me a little more about your journey and how you got to where you are now?
Hi, Tony. Pleasure to be here. It's been a really interesting journey so far for me. And just to kind of summarize, I've spent most of my career at the intersection of media and technology. First half of my career was largely focused on broadcast media. So I worked with a whole host of Indian broadcasters. In the later half of my career, it's been more of technology, but still kind of I continue to dabble in the world of media. And then since past 4 years, I am kind of the founding member of Times Bridge. It's a very interesting journey so far. So yeah, that's a quick summary about me.
I think you're well placed for this topic. You're in a position that many of us are not in, to be able to see perhaps behind the scenes of our digital world. The problem or the reality we face is that because of the pandemic or because of our geographic distance, we rely so much on what we see on screen, online. Now, because of that, the integrity or the truthfulness of information becomes very important. And the word misinformation, and I think the subset of which is disinformation, have become buzzwords in the media world. What makes it so important now to focus and to think about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think misinformation, disinformation, fake news, whatever you want to call it, there are many forms of that. And they existed even before, advent of internet. Like those things were always around. But what has happened is with internet, with social platforms, with messenger platforms like WhatsApp, it's become extremely easy to spread, misinformation in various forms, right? And it is proven through research that fake news actually travels probably much faster than, say, the real news. It's difficult to sort of pinpoint why that happens, but maybe it could be multiple reasons. Maybe it is more interesting fake news, or maybe it is human nature. There are certain nuances about fake news where maybe that makes it spread faster. But the reality is it does happen. And with internet and digital platforms, it's very easy, right? It's very easy to take a video clip and cut it out of context and make it sound like something else, or trim a picture and spread that picture to again put it out of context, right? It's very easy to do this, and this is being faced by organizations, individuals, government departments, and it's everywhere. And the scale at which it is happening, most technology companies struggle to address it because the scale is just tremendous, right? I mean, it can happen in the form of millions and billions. And there is no way that any technology company as of now has figured out a way to sort of put a stop to it or address it and nip it into the bud. It is even more so, becomes complicated when this is happening in, let's say, the non-core markets of these technology companies. For example, countries like India, countries like Southeast Asian countries, where the languages can be even more challenging. If these spread of misinformation starts happening in languages outside of English, it's even more challenging to kind of address it because the algorithms are not equipped yet to kind of identify these kind of issues. There are not enough resources that are allocated to these countries, which are seen as quote unquote international markets or remote markets outside of their core sort of headquarters. That's another challenge. And hence, it has become extremely important for people in leadership positions in companies or government departments to be aware about how to sort of identify these misinformation areas, and more importantly, to address them and sort of start working on solving those.
There was a time when we relied purely on mainstream media to get our information. But nowadays, social media is the means by which people project themselves. We have to keep in mind that, when we look at an Instagram feed, somebody is putting their best foot forward, or they're altering their news on themselves to make themselves look good. I think people tend to forget this and rely a lot on social media. Is there a way that we can police ourselves in making sure that what we see in social media is more factual or more honest?
It can happen through a few ways, right? I think, like you rightly said, most people now probably get their news out of social media feed, and not necessarily from traditionally editorialized environment like a media company. It could be an influencer, dishing out some information, can be construed as news by a lot of people, or it could be a meme page that is actually spreading information, and that could be construed as news. And that's where the risk is, right? So I think one is, we as consumers, we can be more vigilant about who we follow and who we believe, right? I think that's one part. Just being aware about what we are sort of following, and what are the identifying the sources which are more, I would say, reliable compared to others. I think that's one part. But I think it's not easy. It's not easy for consumers to sort of do that, because the onus lies on the platforms. Onus lies on let's say governments. Onus lies with the, let's say, companies which are trying to spread their own message. And one has to be very, very careful who you partner with. One has to be extremely careful with making sure that your source and you are directly sort of spreading the message from some of these platforms. You can partner with many influential voices, for example, to make sure that the right message is going out in the right form, right? And it is done in a manner that is easily understandable across multiple layers of stakeholders you may have, right? So if your product or service is being consumed by younger audience, Gen Z, or someone who's definitely not consuming like old age media, then you have to sort of tell them in the relevant platform. If it, for example, the younger audience is present at Discord, and if you think that you need to sort of go into Discord and spread the message in the format that they are willing to understand, I think that's so the onus lies on the companies and the leadership of these companies to sort of make sure that you are choosing the right platforms and choosing the right voices to sort of spread the word. But I think beyond all this, the step number one is just to be clued into these platforms and understand the sources of misinformation. I think listening is step one to everything. If you are not listening, and if you are not aware about what is being kind of spoken about you, and potential hazards or potential areas of misinformation that could start from various sources, a lot of companies actually miss out on that. And I would say that step one to everything is just listen, listen, listen. I think that's very, very critical.
It's an important piece of advice there. But Vero, from your experience, could you share with us a story wherein you've been actually able to handle or tackle online misinformation?
One example, or I think it played out in front of everyone. The last 2 years of pandemic is a probably a very easy to understand sort of example of it started with different layers of misinformation about a spread of virus that happened in the early stages. And then in the later stages, I think there was a lot of misinformation about like vaccines and whether the vaccine is good, or, there were many sort of misinformation pieces around how risky it could be to take, vaccine and so on and so forth. If you were to look at that scenario, I think a lot of stakeholders came together to solve for it, right? I think it was really heartening to see, for example, every social platform making sure that they went out and started creating call outs, right? So everything about COVID, for example, had a call out saying that here are the sources of information, right? Sources of information you could check out from. If you go to Instapage, or if you go to Google, there are reliable sources which were starting to sort of pop out every time you are consuming or interacting with the content around that. Then there were again relevant direct sort of sources of information which was kind of shipped out, right? So government departments, vaccine companies, they were all talking to the media directly. They were also talking through their own social platforms. They had leaders who were actually out there telling information about vaccines and the efficacies and everything else, the vaccines being safe, directly happening through. So, for example, in India, there is a gentleman called Adar Poonawalla, who basically runs this company called Serum Institute, one of the world's largest vaccine manufacturers. He was at the forefront of just being out there in media and just making sure that he's telling about the vaccine, also on social media, sort of actively posting about what's happening. So I think just being direct out there is really important. And then, of course, again, just partnering with the right influential voices. You have to identify who are the right influential voices. It could be different in different cases. It could be sports person, it could be a entertainment celebrity, it could be an internet creator. But just making sure that you sort of find the right people to partner with, and then, of course, spreading the message. So I think it was a great learning experience in my view, how while in parallel there was all sort of all sorts of messages which were spreading on platforms like WhatsApp, which could be extremely dangerous. But I think it eventually, this sort of holistic approach towards making sure that the misinformation is kind of addressed had a really, really good impact and outcome. And at least in India, we saw a very high acceptance of vaccines.
That's great, because I know during this pandemic, people are disconnected, and if we rely on social media, you'll have all these people medicating themselves or prescribing themselves. That's a very interesting story, and I've taken a few notes as well. The next thing I wanted to ask you is, what is that one sort of practical tip or piece of advice you have for leaders? And these are leaders both in the corporate world as well as in government, when it comes to dealing with online misinformation.
Beyond what I mentioned earlier, I would say one very, very, very important thing one could keep in mind is make sure that you are getting the messaging right. One has to spend really good amount of time to make sure that your messaging is right, messaging is simple, and messaging is sort of repeatable. If one has to just focus on getting that aspect right, it just half of your battle is won. Because if it's simple and it's repeatable, then whoever you are passing it on, right? I mean, it's impossible to do it yourself on your own for every sort of outlets of media, or just making sure that it's out there. So even if you're passing on that simple message to an influencer or to a media company, or you're yourself going out and sort of doing a press conference or whatever else, right? I think making sure that the messaging is clear and simple and repeatable is one of the most important aspects, which should be focused on.
I hope our leaders will listen to what you have to say. I just am reminded that here in the Philippines, we have our own misinformation issue. As you know, we have elections going on, and literally social media has rewritten history and forgotten this whole period of the Marcos dictatorship. People are still alive today who remember very well what happened, but the younger generations actually believe otherwise, and it's become dangerous. That's why it's this topic's been something that's important.
If I may just like half a minute of that, I
Yes.
think very, very interesting your point you made here. And I think elections are generally a very, very ripe moments for misinformation, unfortunately, for everywhere in the world. And I think in India, we have this joke about WhatsApp University. Basically,
University.
basically, people who believe in WhatsApp forwards and people who spread that message, they are called the WhatsApp University graduates. And essentially, it's kind of way of naming and shaming in a way, but it's, I think, unfortunate, and it needs to be obviously addressed. And I think we are a long way away from addressing those issues. So yeah.
I wonder if I can get a PhD at WhatsApp University. Hero Jani, thank you so much for sharing your time and precious knowledge with us on a very important topic. I think I have a feeling we're going to be revisiting this as events unfold in the world and people do want to deal with correct information on the internet. So thank you again, Vero, for being with us. This has been Tony Abad on the Digital Diplomat. We look forward to having you all again in our next episode.